It was a warm and beautiful Saturday morning in Tokyo, Japan. The kind of day that felt perfect for escaping the stress of everyday life in the bustling metropolis. Most people chose to stay home and relax, while others took the opportunity to stroll along the banks of the Sumida River with their families, picnicking, walking by the water, or enjoying ice cream under the gentle sun. But Colonel Ito wasn't one for leisure that day. He and his unit were deep in training. In his eyes, one must always be prepared for emergencies. And he took that responsibility very seriously. After all, anything could happen at any time. Who could say when a rogue dictator or a terrorist cell might suddenly plunge the world into chaos? Or when nature might unleash one of its unpredictable disasters? Whatever the scenario, the military had to be ready. Though Ito never considered himself a militarist or someone who glorified war, he saw himself as a protector, a servant of the people. He stood with a cup of coffee in hand, watching his troops. Some were hard at work in drills, others inspecting weapons and armored vehicles. Everything seemed ready for deployment. Then, just as he raised the cup for another sip, a blinding flash of light split the sky. Startled, Ito choked on the coffee and dropped the mug. His eyes widened in disbelief. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, stomach twisting. It looked eerily like the flash of a nuclear explosion. But it wasn't. He scanned the horizon and caught sight of a junior officer in the nearby observation tower. The man was pointing at the sky. "Colonel, look over there!" Ito followed his gesture, his eyes locked onto a glowing, swirling structure that had begun to materialize in midair, expanding by the second. It looked bizarre and dangerous. "It's over the Edogawa district," the officer called out. Ito's stomach dropped. Without hesitation, he barked his orders. "Get the units ready. Everyone into vehicles and tanks. Pilots, prep the helicopters for immediate launch. Move, move." He had no idea what they were dealing with yet, but he knew orders would be coming down any minute. His instincts screamed that this was no ordinary emergency. And what happened next? No one could have predicted. He'd assumed the anomaly was a natural phenomenon, or perhaps some secret weapons test by an enemy state. But the truth was far stranger. It was a portal, a massive gateway to another world, now wide open on the outskirts of Tokyo. Even as his troops scrambled into formation, 3 colossal figures emerged from the glowing rift. At first, the sight was almost too surreal to process. Giant creatures walking on 2 legs, covered in fur, rabbits, anthropomorphic rabbits. Towering high above the cityscape, they looked remarkably human, except for their sheer size and distinctly lagomorphic features. Some had brown fur, others white, but all of them were impossibly huge. "Holy, they're bigger than Godzilla." Ito whispered, barely able to believe his eyes. The situation escalated rapidly. His radio crackled to life with new orders. Hold position, prepare for engagement, but do not fire unless directly attacked. As the convoy advanced toward the Edogawa district, reports began flooding in. Portals had opened all across the globe, and similar giant rabbits were stepping through in other countries as well. No one knew what was going on, but one thing was clear. The creatures didn't appear hostile. When Ito's unit arrived at the site, the 3 giants stood calmly, the portal behind them already closed. It was a family, 2 enormous adults, and a child, still gigantic by human standards, easily over 100 meters tall, but clearly smaller than the parents. The military convoy came to a halt. Engines hummed quietly. Tension filled the air. Colonel Ito climbed out of his armored vehicle. He wouldn't have called himself fearless, far from it, but the creatures didn't seem aggressive. They looked expectant, as if waiting. The mother, an elegant rabbit woman with long limbs and bright white fur, lowered herself to her knees. Her gaze fell on the tiny vehicles below, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke. Her voice was a thunderous boom, too deep and foreign to comprehend. But then she activated a device, and suddenly her words became clear. "We come in peace. We are refugees. Our world is under attack by a malevolent species. We were forced to flee. Please grant us asylum. We will do whatever you require." Colonel Ito stood frozen. His heart pounded as he looked up at the enormous alien woman. She met his gaze, not with threat, but with a plea. What a wild, impossible twist of fate. It was first contact, and yet not an invasion. They weren't conquerors. They were refugees. How would something like this ever be handled? Could the world even begin to manage beings of this size, economically, socially, politically? Or could they perhaps even become a blessing for mankind? The colonel took a deep breath. Aside from the fact that the decision wasn't his to make, he needed more information. So he asked, "Is it just the three of you? You three?" The woman shook her head. Then she opened her large hands, revealing a group of rabbit-like beings, though these were about the size of humans. "We are the exception when it comes to size. Most of us are like you." She glanced over at her daughter, who, along with the father, also bent down and opened her hands, allowing even more of the Anthro creatures to climb out. There were hundreds of them, tormented people and entire families, clearly all refugees who had been through terrible things. Ito raised an eyebrow. Okay, that's interesting, especially the part about the size difference. Maybe you could explain that a bit more in detail." There were long conversations. Higher-ranking military officers and even several government ministers arrived to assess the situation. While the talks in Japan proceeded relatively smoothly, reports from other countries painted a very different picture. For example, in Germany, the military had apparently opened fire immediately, and the situation had escalated into a bloody conflict. But as it turned out, their weapons were pretty much useless against the giants. That fact alone made even the Japanese authorities cautious and uneasy. Later, the father of the giant rabbit family explained the situation in more detail. He spoke of the Ovamian giants, who had invaded their world. These invaders had grown to their enormous size using advanced technology, and the refugees, people had managed to kill a few of them, seizing their high-tech wrist devices and using them for themselves. They had ultimately lost the war, but at least, as giants, they'd been able to save some of their kind and escape to this world, to Earth. It was a crazy story, and Earth's authorities still weren't quite sure what to make of it. One thing was certain, though. Every country reacted differently to the arrival of the giant aliens and their smaller companions. Some nations granted asylum, others attacked immediately. Some refused entry and demanded that the aliens leave their territory. And then there were countries that welcomed them warmly, eager to integrate them into society and even celebrate their arrival. The reactions were all over the place. While these long, drawn-out discussions continued, the daughter began to grow bored. She turned to her mother and asked, "Mom, can I go into the city and play with the little people? I'd really like to play giant and stomp on some houses." The mother looked at her daughter sternly and was just about to scold her when something in her expression shifted. Her daughter's words had triggered something deep inside her, a rather dark emotion. It was as if an instinct were awakening, a strong, primal urge to embrace her new size, to use her power, to be destructive, to show others how tiny and helpless they truly were in comparison. She slowly rose to her full, towering height and looked down over the city. Then her gaze wandered to the soldiers below. Colonel Ito immediately noticed the mischievous smile creeping across her lips. "Oh, that doesn't look good." Well then, years later, 20 to be exact, the world lay in ruins. Human society still existed, but it was nothing like before. Everything had changed dramatically. Jocelyn moved through the dusty streets of her reservation, accompanied by 3 others from her squad. She didn't even know what country she was in anymore, and honestly, it didn't matter. The giant rabbits had taken control, devouring, crushing, or relocating humans however they pleased. In a way, Jocelyn was lucky that she'd only been relocated to a reservation, even though she had lost her family in the process and would probably never see them again. She didn't even know if they were still alive. And the word reservation was a cruel joke anyway. These places were nothing more than facilities for breeding humans, to be used by the rabbits either as food or as toys, depending on their mood. But humans weren't the only ones being oppressed. As Jocelyn walked through the streets, her eyes fell on a rabbit family sitting in the dirt, staring ahead in sadness. These anthros, roughly human-sized, had been treated almost as poorly by their giant kin as the humans had. Maybe a little less brutally, since they were of the same species, but it wasn't exactly kindness either. As a result, these smaller rabbits had become the targets of human hatred and resentment, easy outlets for all the anger and frustration. The world had become a horrible place. And it was all the fault of a scientist named Dr. Cooney Frorums, a SETI employee who'd had the brilliant idea of broadcasting Earth's coordinates into space with a welcoming signal. For the desperate Anthro rabbits back then, it hadn't just been an invitation. It had seemed like their best and final chance to escape total extinction at the hands of the Ovamians. But who cared about that now? That was ancient history. Johnson, a tall, red-haired resistance fighter, was in charge of her squad. He had his eyes on a few shopkeepers. "Hey, you haven't paid up yet!" The Asian man behind the counter of the half-open shop replied with a sneer. "Paid for what exactly? Your protection? That's ridiculous. The Giants will take what they want when they want, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're just pretending to be heroes while stealing our resources." "Oh, really?" Johnson shouted, his face turning red as he stepped closer. "We are the resistance. The only thing standing between you and those monsters. We're humanity's last hope, and selfish bastards like you, who refuse to help, who won't contribute, you're the reason we haven't been able to fight back. Not enough resources, no unity. Is that what you want to be, huh? A traitor?" The man scoffed in disgust. "Pa, then I guess I am a traitor, but at least I can feed my family as long as I'm alive." Johnson punched him hard, sending the man sprawling backwards onto the ground. It had begun. "Oh, really? Then let's see if you stay alive, you bastard." The other two fighters grabbed different shopkeepers and started beating them until they finally agreed to pay protection, whether in food, metal, or whatever useful resources they had left. Jocelyn couldn't bear to watch. She turned her head away, and her gaze landed on a painted poster showing the leader of the resistance, Cora, a red-haired woman with a stern, determined look that was meant to inspire hope and confidence. Below it, a slogan read, "Shh, who do you call? Bunny Busters." And in smaller print beneath that, "We're always looking for help. Want to work with us? Contact a patrol unit." As she read the poster, the shopkeeper's little daughter came and clung to Jocelyn, either because she couldn't bear to see her father being beaten, or perhaps because she no longer had a mother and Jocelyn somehow seemed trustworthy. Yes, Jocelyn had always meant well by everyone, and you could tell. But the rest of the resistance members weren't exactly like that. Jocelyn felt a wave of sadness. She had joined the resistance back then because she truly believed there was still hope, that the resistance was the only real option to make a change. But this wasn't what she had signed up for. Johnson returned, his face speckled with blood, proudly holding the carcass of a butchered pig in both hands. "Ha! This should last us a couple of days. What did you guys get?" The others had scavenged some rusty metal and a handful of seeds. Nothing major, but in this world, you had to be satisfied with even the smallest victories. Then Jocelyn suddenly felt it, a shiver, a strange sensation, faint at first but unmistakable. The ground beneath her feet was trembling. Then more, stronger and stronger. "They're coming," she whispered. Then, louder, she shouted, "Alarm! The giant rabbits are coming! Take cover!" Chaos erupted instantly. People ran, desperately trying to reach the nearest bunker or shelter. But of course, there weren't nearly enough places for everyone. The streets dissolved into panic and confusion, and it was painfully clear that, just like on so many days before, there would be countless casualties again today. "We have to get out of here! Now! Move, move, go!" Johnson shouted while grabbing a few loose items that looked vaguely useful and took off running. The so-called freedom fighters, once brave and defiant, had dropped all pretense of courage. They were fleeing, just like everyone else. Jocelyn wanted to run too, but the girl, the vendor's daughter, clung to her legs, sobbing. "Please don't leave me. I'm scared," she cried, trembling. Jocelyn was trembling too as the colossal shadow loomed beyond the rooftops. A massive figure emerged, a young rabbit woman, roughly 120 meters tall, with light brown fur and a mischievous smile painted across her face. "Hey everyone, why all the screaming? Are you seriously scared of me? Am I not a cute big bunny?" Her voice thundered down the streets, a playful mockery echoing through the reservat city. She strolled between the buildings, her enormous paws crushing panicked people like they were nothing more than bugs. A series of wet crunches followed in her wake, as human bodies were flattened under her furry feet. "Whoopsie! Did I step on a few of you? My bad. But come on, you're all just so tiny and fragile. What am I supposed to do, huh? Her voice dripped with sarcasm, clearly intended to deepen the panic. And it worked. The screams only grew louder. Jocelyn's entire body was seized with fear. Her heart pounded wildly as the rabbit giantess approached, her enormous footfalls shaking the earth with every step. She had to act. Somehow, lying in the dirt in front of her was the girl's father, beaten, exhausted, reaching out toward them in desperation. The girl still clung to Jocelyn, frozen in terror. And the rebel soldiers? They were nowhere to be seen. All of them had abandoned their posts, fleeing, hiding, doing anything but protecting the people. Someone had to do the right thing, even if it meant dying. Jocelyn forced herself to move. She stumbled over to a toppled market stall, raised her rifle, and opened fire on the towering rabbit woman. But what good would it do? She was gigantic. Entire buildings crumbled beneath her paws, kicking up clouds of dust that veiled the streets in a thick haze. Her skin and fur looked impenetrable. Jocelyn knew her bullets wouldn't be enough. Damn it, I need grenades, she thought, panicked. But only Johnson had any, and he had already run like the coward he was. Her heart raced faster and faster as the giantess drew closer, her careless steps crushing dozens of people, humans and some anthros alike, with every move. Jocelyn had to crane her neck higher and higher just to see her face. It was like looking up at a living skyscraper. Then, with a final thunderous stomp, the girl's father was gone. His body cracked and splattered beneath the weight of that enormous paw. Jocelyn turned away, trying to shield the girl from the sight. Heavy wind blew around them. Dust and smoke filled the air. Then, just as she turned to aim again, a massive shadow engulfed her. A hand, bigger than a house, descended from the sky and wrapped around Jocelyn and the girl. And then, they were lifted. Everything spun for a second, and Jocelyn suddenly found herself lying in a warm, soft palm. A massive face loomed over her, grinning with curiosity. "You two are adorable," the rabbit giantess giggled. Her warm breath swept over them like a hurricane. "You look delicious," she said, pointing at the girl. Then she turned to Jocelyn. "And you, so brave, the only one who dared shoot at me. Makes me wonder, are you brave, or just dumb and naive?" Jocelyn stared into those huge, deep brown eyes and saw her reflection within them. She felt tiny, helpless, utterly insignificant. "Speechless, huh? You're shaking all over? Ah, how cute! Are you afraid I might eat you?" The giantess opened her maw wide, revealing large, gleaming white teeth that sparkled in the sunlight, then closed it again slowly. "Don't worry. I won't eat you, not today at least. I think I'd rather play with you two for a while. Spend some time together. Get to know you a bit. I'm Piper, by the way. And who are you?" Jocelyn's heart thundered like a jackhammer. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. The girl next to her finally said, I'm Liwa." Piper squinted playfully. "Liwa? Huh? And the woman next to you? She doesn't look like your mom. Is she mute?" Leave her alone." Jocelyn finally managed to stammer. "Oh, so you can speak. Good. You want me to leave the little one alone? Fine, but only if you tell me your name. If not, I'm going to eat her." She picked Liwa up between two fingers and dangled her above her open mouth. The girl screamed in terror. Okay, I'm Jocelyn. Why do you even want to know? You're going to kill us all anyway." Piper looked satisfied and gently placed Liwa back into her palm. "Ah, Jocelyn. Nice to meet you, little one. And yes, I could kill you all right now, but I only kill people when they bore me. As long as you stay interesting, I'll keep you alive. Promise. Hey." She glanced into her pouch. "Now then, I've got more collecting to do. Not enough people yet for what I have in mind. Make yourselves comfortable in my hand and think of ways to entertain me. Until then," her fingers closed slowly, enclosing both girls in the warm, dark prison of her fist. Jocelyn couldn't believe it. She was still alive. A prisoner, yes, but in this world, survival was a rare gift, even if it was the only thing left. And yet her future looked grim. What would Piper do with them? Would she eat them? Keep them as toys? Or something far, far worse? With her fist tightly closed, Piper stomped through the streets of the settlement. Sadly, there weren't many settlements in the reserve as large as this one, so she intended to enjoy her little visit here to the fullest. Her long, powerful legs moved effortlessly along the road, flattening everything and everyone beneath them. Each of her steps made the ground shake. Windows shattered. Buildings trembled. Dozens of tiny bodies were casually buried and squashed beneath her massive furry paws. She barely felt the two women in her hand, Jocelyn and Liwa. Just slight twitches, little movements, like the tickling of a couple of bugs. They were kind of cute. Definitely good toys to play with for a while. She was sure of that. With her other hand, she lazily reached out here and there, plucking up little groups of people, stuffing the frightened ones into her cloth pouch. Provisions. Food for the coming weeks. She chuckled quietly to herself, her gaze drifting over the terrified crowds on the dusty streets. "You're so tiny, so pathetically small," she murmured with a crooked grin. "And me? Look at me. I'm so much more powerful and better than you little specks. I can crush you whenever I want." And she did exactly that. Slowly and deliberately, she strutted down the street with exaggerated elegance, letting her paws crash down on as many people as possible. She moved her legs in graceful, fluid motions, sometimes stepping down slowly to give the little ones a clear moment of realization, to let them feel how close death was. Crushing people beneath her was her favorite pastime. She loved the fear, the panic she caused in the tinies, and the fact that no one could do anything about it, not even those so-called resistance fighters. Happily, she continued, grinding everything and everyone in her path. She didn't care whether they were humans or anthros. It made no difference to her. The squashed remains of people, anthros, vehicles, and buildings left a messy, gooey trail beneath her paws. Piper gave a quick glance downward. Splat. "Oops," she giggled. "Oh no, were those your friends? Or your families? That's so sad," she said in a mock, sympathetic tone. "But it's your own fault if you're that slow." Every step was a reminder of her absolute superiority. Every stomped group of people, a little confirmation of just how much more she was. She was 120 meters tall, strong, nimble, playful, and she was the one who decided who lived and who died. More and more were crushed beneath her souls. "You know," she said with a smirk, "sometimes I feel like you want me to step on you. Or why else are you so damn slow? Do you actually like my paws? Hey, want to be flattened beneath them? Hi-hee." A resistance fighter screamed and charged at her with his assault rifle. Maybe a desperate act of courage. Maybe he actually thought his weapon could do something, and he fired with all his might. But it didn't do a thing. Piper bent down and looked at him. "Seriously?" she whispered in amused disbelief. Then, as if in slow motion, she let her paw drift over him and pressed him slowly into the asphalt. But she didn't crush him immediately. She gently slid her paw across his body, almost caressing him with her soul. Then her big toe came down softly on him. She toyed with him, pressing lightly again and again until his body finally gave in with a satisfying crack. A warm shiver ran through her. Whoa, that was intense. Felt so good. After a while, though, things went quiet. Most of the population in this part of the city had either fled, hidden in bunkers, or now lay dead in her footprints. And Piper was satisfied, her pouch nicely stuffed, her body full of freshly gathered energy. She looked back at the reserve. She hadn't caused too much destruction, only a few buildings crushed, and most people had likely survived. Good. She had deliberately only squashed a fraction of the inhabitants. The rest would recover, repopulate, and regrow. So she could come back again soon. It was supposed to be a sustainable system. She had to be mindful of that. "All right, that's enough for today," she muttered, stretching and digging her toes into the rubble before starting to walk again. With mighty steps, Piper left the area. The walls of the reserve weren't much of a barrier. She could just step over them, or stomp them down if she felt like it. With every step she took, the earth shook beneath her, and wild animals scattered as she marched homeward. With a satisfied grin, Piper stomped through the forest, which to her looked more like a patch of tall grass, heading toward her settlement, a fenced-off area far from the human reserves, somewhere near the edge of a canyon. The sun was already low, casting long shadows across the land, and a few other giants could be seen. They were clearly smaller than Piper, but still between 30 and 50 meters tall. There was a muscular rabbit woman with chains around her wrists, chains that had once held the anchors of a massive ship. A thin rabbit woman with white fur, currently taking laundry down from a 100-meter-long clothesline. and a giant human woman lounging on a recliner, soaking up the last rays of sunlight while tiny humans and anthros worshipped her bare feet. Piper waved at them with a cheeky grin, her body beginning to shrink smoothly from 120 meters to around 40, adapting to the scaled-down world inside the gates of her residential area. She lived here with 5 other giants in a kind of shared living arrangement. Piper's house was a blocky structure made of light sandstone, reinforced with steel beams to support her massive frame. The windows were small, but plenty of warm light filtered through. Inside, the temperature was pleasant. The floor, smoothed, compacted stone, was nearly sterile in cleanliness, which Piper appreciated greatly. She always walked around barefoot, after all. With a dull thud, she dropped to her knees and opened her hand, where Jocelyn and Liwa were still clinging to each other in fear. The 2 women slowly crawled out of her massive, furry palm and onto the warm stone floor. From their tiny perspective, Piper loomed like a living monument above them. "All right, you 2 specks. Better stay close to the wall, yeah?" Her voice rumbled like thunder through the space as she stroked her long ears. "I mean, unless you want to get stepped on, in that case, go ahead and stand right in the middle." She chuckled and stood back up, taking a few steps that made the entire floor subtly vibrate beneath the movement of her long, springy legs. Then she reached into her pouch and pulled out the squirming humans, dropping them one by one into a large, transparent container built into the wall. Dozens of others were already in there, a cramped crowd, insignificant to Piper. They were just supplies. Food. None of them were interesting enough to speak to. With arms crossed, she stood tall again, looking down at Jocelyn and Liwa, who clearly had no idea what to do. Their eyes wandered nervously through the gigantic room, scanning the shiny surfaces and the heavy furniture. Piper let out an annoyed sigh. "Seriously now, you 2 look like you're too dumb to breathe." She leaned down a bit, pointing a claw toward the wall. "See that little door next to the container down there? That's for folks like you. Inside, there are tiny rooms, micro bathrooms, mini stuff, everything you need. You'll be working for me, keeping the floor spotless, especially when feel like squashing someone." To make her point clear, she reached into the box and plucked out a single man, a trembling human with shaky legs. She gently set him down on the floor in front of her, glanced at him briefly, then looked back at the women. "Pay attention. This is a lesson." Slowly, almost sensually, she raised her right foot and hovered it above the pleading little man. Then, with deliberate slowness, she began to press down with the soft underside of her paw, first just a little pressure, then a swirling motion, then pressed again until a faint crunch echoed through the room, followed by a wet squelch as the body gave way. A satisfied hum escaped her throat. She was clearly enjoying this little demonstration. When that happens, you know what to do. Clean the floor. Fast. Or you'll be next. Jocelyn immediately grabbed Liwa and dragged her toward a small storage closet built into the wall. Her fingers were trembling as she pulled out tiny cleaning tools, brushes, cloths, a little canister of liquid. They hurried back submissively and began scrubbing the bloody spot, wiping away the red splatter and squashed remains from the stone floor. Piper watched them with amusement, hands on her hips. Now that's what I like to see. While the 2 worked, Jocelyn focused on just one thing, keeping Liwa safe, as much as she could. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought began to take root. A thought about escape, about finding a way out of this. She had no clue how, not yet. But she would figure it out. Somehow. Someday. Meanwhile, Piper dropped herself contentedly onto a huge cushion, stretched out her legs, and planted her feet right above the 2 tiny women. Then she absent-mindedly played with her toes, watching the little ones at work. Looks like you might be good at this." "Very good. Once you're done there, I want you to clean my soles. I've crushed a lot of people today, and I bet they're filthy. Got it?" Jocelyn nodded quickly. "Yes, we'll do it." Piper smirked, satisfied. "Good. I think you're starting to understand your place." After the 2 had sufficiently cleaned the floor, Jocelyn swallowed hard. It was time to take care of the giant paws of the rabbit woman. Jocelyn felt afraid, deeply uneasy, but she knew she had to do this. She knelt on trembling knees before the enormous foot, which rested in front of her like a wall of soft beige skin. The toes were slightly spread, The foot laid on its side as if Piper was deliberately offering the perfect surface, giving Jocelyn access to nearly every spot despite her comparatively tiny size. A subtle scent of warmth, sweat, and something indescribably animal lingered in the air. Carefully, Jocelyn ran a damp cloth over the smeared lines of the massive paw, still bearing traces of crushed humans, tiny remnants of blood, grime, and minuscule fabric fibers that were once scraps of clothing. Her heart was pounding, not only from fear, not exactly. It was the pressure, that paralyzing awareness that a being towered over her, one that could kill her with the slightest movement, at any time, whenever she felt like it. But Piper was pleased. Yes, keep going. That feels really good, like a gentle massage. I think I might have found a real use for you, little one. Jocelyn had finished cleaning after a while. It had been exhausting, but she did it all on her own, because she didn't want to overwhelm Liwa. She set the cloth aside, closed her eyes, and softly kissed the skin between the ball and the toes of Piper's foot. Her heart clenched, not from disgust, but from the anger she buried deep inside. But she showed nothing, only submission. Piper moaned with satisfaction. You really do have a talent, little one. She wiggled her toes gently. Jocelyn could feel the gigantic foot shifting, almost playfully, as if Piper might crush her at any second if she felt like it, but she didn't. You're starting to grow on me. Jocelyn forced a strained smile. Thank you, Piper. I just want to make you happy. But inside, everything in her screamed. She thought of Liwa, of possibilities to escape somehow. But not yet. Not now. For now, she had to play along. Oh, you're making me happy, all right? Just keep going, yeah? I want to feel those sweet little lips and your tongue on my soul. Just keep going. Piper stretched and relaxed, enjoying the tender sensation as Jocelyn continued to kiss and lick her soles. She was convinced. This time, she had found something truly valuable. That little Jocelyn was a lucky catch. Days passed. Jocelyn and Liwa lived in their tiny room, pushing through the tasks Piper gave them, scrubbing the floors, removing remains of crushed people, washing her paws, even painting her claws sometimes. Every single day was a workday. Again and again, the giant rabbit woman used them like tiny slaves, constantly reminding them of their place, at her feet. They lived on the floor, were frequently and playfully stepped on, or worn around her ankles or wrists like living accessories. But Piper grew more and more cheerful over time. Especially Jocelyn had managed to secure a special place in her interest. You're clever, she once said, stroking Jocelyn's tiny head with her huge finger. If you stay obedient, you might live a very long time. Liwa, on the other hand, was quiet. Far too quiet for Piper's taste. She carried out the tasks without protest, barely spoke, ate very little. There was something broken in her eyes. Ever since she had watched Piper crush her father underfoot, something inside her had died. Piper didn't understand her feelings, though. She's so boring, she muttered once. Maybe I'll just eat her one day. Jocelyn tried to protect Liwa. She often held her, talked to her, even if Liwa hardly replied. But she could feel it. The girl was slipping further away. She clearly wasn't coping with this situation well at all. Then, one day, Piper was lounging back, her legs stretched out across the wide table, while Jocelyn and Liwa walked over her massive toes, using tiny brushes to apply green polish to her toenails. Warm sunlight spilled in through the open window. Outside, someone was calling for Piper, probably one of the other giants. Piper picked up the two tiny girls and placed them next to her paw on the table. I'll be right back. Don't do anything stupid, she said before standing up and leaving the room. The window was open. Right next to the table. This was their chance. Jocelyn didn't hesitate for even a second. Now, she whispered. She grabbed a long white thread she had hidden days ago at the edge of the desk, meant to serve as a makeshift rope, and tied it to an object on the table heavy enough to act as an anchor. Liwa trembled but nodded. Together, they climbed onto the windowsill, stepped over the threshold, and began lowering themselves down with the thread. The ground was far below. One wrong move and they'd fall to their deaths. But it was their only chance. And then, there was a rumble behind them. Well, what do we have here? Piper was suddenly there, right in front of the window, casting a massive shadow over them. Her ears twitched with annoyance. Escape? Really? She grabbed the thread with a firm grip and yanked it upward. In an instant, the two were back in her huge palm. Kicking, gasping, helpless. Piper looked at them, clearly disappointed. I thought you were smarter, Jocelyn. Then her gaze shifted to Liwa. But you were never much use. I think it's time I make an example of you. Jocelyn screamed. No, please don't. Take me, not her. Do whatever you want to me, but leave Liwa alone. She's already been through so much. But Piper shook her head. You're always so brave, always trying to protect others. That's at least entertaining. But her? There's just nothing. So boring. Why do you even care about her? Well, doesn't matter now. Slowly, she opened her mouth. Huge wet teeth gleamed. Liwa shrieked, but Piper simply let her fall inside. The girl let out one final scream as she dropped onto the tongue, then the mouth closed around her. Piper swallowed her without a second thought. Jocelyn sobbed. She pounded her fists against the furry skin. But it was useless. No pleading in the world could undo what had just happened. Liwa was gone. Piper casually wiped her mouth and looked down at the tiny Jocelyn in her palm. You stay. You keep working for me and cuddling my feet, and you forget what just happened. Then maybe you get to keep living. Got it? Jocelyn couldn't speak. She could only nod with tears in her eyes, and inside her something began to form. Deeper, darker, stronger than ever before. She would get out, one day, and Piper would pay. She would kill her, no matter what it took. Time passed, one day after another, and each one was hell. Jocelyn continued to live with Piper. She served her, cleaned her floors, washed her paws, did everything Piper demanded. And she had to watch. Watch as Piper casually trampled or devoured groups of tiny humans as if they were just little snacks. She often laughed while doing it, like it was some fun pastime. Sometimes she picked out individuals, popped them into her mouth, chewed slowly, and swallowed them with a satisfied sigh. Others, she simply crushed underfoot, perhaps because they didn't look tasty enough. And after that, it was Jocelyn's job to clean everything up. The red smears on the tiles, the mashed remains stuck between Piper's toes. Jocelyn cleaned it all, automatically. But on the inside, there was only pain. Especially when she thought about Liwa. The image of her screaming, disappearing into that monster's mouth. How no one helped her. How she never got the chance to live a life of her own choosing. How she was simply gone forever. Jocelyn couldn't stop thinking about her, but alongside the pain, something else was growing. Her rage. She would escape. Somehow. And once she was free, she would prepare. One day, she would come back, and Piper would pay. One night, Piper was fast asleep, so deeply asleep she was snoring loudly. Her massive body was stretched out across a bed of blankets and oversized pillows. It was clear she wouldn't wake up anytime soon. Jocelyn got up, quietly. Now, this was her moment. She had worked on it for days, unnoticed. A crack in the giant wooden door barely visible far down near the bottom, where Piper would never look. With a sharp piece of metal she had found while cleaning, she had filed, scratched, and chipped away at it. And now, the gap was just wide enough. She pressed her body through. Splinters scraped her skin, her clothes tore on jagged wood. But then, she was outside, finally free. The moon was bright in the sky. Full moon. Clear, cold light flooded the yard, just enough for Jocelyn to look around for the first time. The giant settlement was relatively small. 3 bizarre huts, oversized, crooked, oddly built, suited for beings 30 to 50 meters tall. Clotheslines, footpaths, tools, all scaled up to match. And of course, the giants didn't live alone. Inside each hut, just like in Piper's home, there were countless boxes filled with desperate humans, kept like supplies waiting to be eaten or crushed. A nightmare made real. Jocelyn started running. Through what looked like a garden, though it was more of a ruined field. A beaten-down trail cut through it, earth flattened, dry, and hard as rock from constant giant foot traffic. She panted heavily, but inside her, there was a glimmer of hope. Then suddenly, something came from above. A massive foot came down, quietly, almost gently, blocking her path. It was a human foot, clearly feminine in shape, but just as huge as Piper's paw. Jocelyn froze, terrified. The foot landed right in front of her. She hadn't seen the giantess. She was sitting casually on a wall behind her house, legs dangling. Jocelyn hadn't noticed her before, but she should have known. There might still be giants awake. Damn it, but a human giantess? How was that even possible? So many questions hit her at once, and her hope was gone. The blonde giantess tilted her head and gave a soft smile. Her voice was calm and warm. "Well, hello down there. Who might you be?" Jocelyn trembled. Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees, expecting to be crushed. The giantess leaned forward slightly and extended her leg further, gently brushing Jocelyn's tiny body with her huge toes, as if to soothe her. "Are you afraid I'll squish you underfoot?" A soft, amused smile. "Don't worry. I won't. The night's far too peaceful for something so cruel, and I can see you're desperate. Come on, climb onto my toes. I'll lift you up." Jocelyn hesitated, but obeyed. The giantess's skin was warm, slightly sweaty, but oddly comforting. She pulled her leg back up onto the wall and gently reached down, carefully picking up Jocelyn, still nestled between her toes, and placed her into her open palm. She looked at her. Intensely, curiously, but kindly. "I'm Clare." "And who are you?" Jocelyn trembled. Even though she was lying in the warm palm of this giant Clare, who seemed to mean no harm, she couldn't speak. Her lips quivered, her heart raced. Everything in her screamed, "Run!" but her body was frozen. Clare noticed, but she didn't look upset. If anything, her gaze softened even more, almost pitying. "You don't have to say anything," murmured the blonde giantess with her big, kind eyes. "I think I know who you are. Jocelyn, right?" Jocelyn blinked, surprised. "Piper told me about you," Clare continued. "She said you once tried to escape, so I'm not surprised I found you here. Hi-he. But Piper also said that you're a very special tiny. You take such good care of her paws. Piper loves that. To her, you're truly valuable. She said she doesn't want to lose you." The words hit Jocelyn like a stab to the chest. It all sounded so absurd. Clare noticed her expression, let out a quiet sigh, and shifted to sit more comfortably on the wall, lifting Jocelyn close to her enormous chest, like a living plush toy. Then she continued speaking, her voice soft and dreamy. "You know, I used to be as small as you. Totally normal. One of many. And then my settlement was raided. By Nure." Claire smiled faintly. "A rabbit giantess, like Piper. Nure lives here too. Maybe you've seen her? No? Anyway, she raided my hometown, but she didn't crush me like the others. No, she saw something special in me and took me with her. She was always sweet to me. We talked for hours, got to know each other. She played with me, kept me in her huge palm, laughed with me. At some point, I truly felt safe with her. So much so that I didn't want to leave anymore. I began to understand how the giants think, why they are the way they are, and where our place is." Jocelyn listened, wide-eyed and confused. "Eventually, Nurai trusted me, and she gave me a bracelet, Ovamian tech, very advanced. It allowed me to grow like her, to become like her. She said I had earned it. Honestly, I didn't even want to be that huge. I was always okay with being small, at her feet, but she wanted me to be her equal. And I didn't want to disappoint her, so here I am, huge and powerful." Jocelyn finally managed a few words. "So you weren't a giant before? And now you're like them?" Claire looked thoughtfully up at the sky. "Yes, exactly. But deep down, I still like being small. Sometimes I long for it, just to be in her hand again. Tiny and helpless. Nure is so overwhelming when she towers over me. I love that. So I'm telling you, maybe you just have to learn to accept your place, to see the good in your situation. Piper does look nice, don't you think? And her paws? They're kind of cute, aren't they?" Jocelyn's eyes flew open in shock. Her voice trembled with disbelief. You can't be serious, right? How can you say something like that? How can you live with such monsters?" Claire was silent for a moment. Then she tilted her head slightly. Her eyes changed. They became colder, more serious. "Because I've become one too." A moment of tense silence. "I've crushed people too, Jocelyn. Many. It's just part of the nature of things. When you're huge, eat or be eaten. Or in our case, be stepped on. Humans eat animals too, or crush tiny insects without a second thought. And compared to us giants, humans are the smaller ones, and they end up as food or toys for us. That's just how it is. You need to accept that, like I did." Jocelyn couldn't believe it. Something inside her twisted. Her worldview was falling apart. A quiet sob escaped her, then another, until she cried, silently, bitterly, shaking. Claire brought her hand, with Jocelyn still inside, closer to her face and pressed the tiny girl gently against her cheek, like comforting a child. "Shh! Don't worry, little Jocelyn. Feel my warm, soft cheek. Isn't that nice? I'm here for you. I won't hurt you. I'll talk to Piper, okay? I know she can be kind of cold sometimes. I'll tell her to be gentler with you. And I'll check in on you from time to time. Take care of you, I promise. You just need to keep being a good tiny. Give her what she wants. Then things will get better. Trust me. Jocelyn wanted to scream, to protest, but she nodded. What else could she have done? Claire smiled. Good. She rose silently from the wall, carefully carrying Jocelyn back to Piper's hut. Not a sound escaped her as she moved, and even though she was massive, her footsteps were somehow soft and quiet. She leaned down, looking at the little crack under the door. Then she looked at the tiny girl in her palm and whispered, I won't tell Piper you were outside, and you can keep this little crack in the door if you like. Come see me anytime you're frustrated or need someone to talk to. I'll be there for you. Promise. But don't ever think about running away again. I don't want Piper to be disappointed. She's my friend too. And if you ever tried to escape, even I would crush you. So please don't try that again if you don't want to end up under my soul. Understood? Jocelyn swallowed. Her voice was barely a whisper. Understood. Claire set her down, gently stroked her goodbye with the tip of a finger. Good girl, always remember, even as a tiny, you can still have a good life. Focus on the positives. Now go inside and snuggle up against Piper's paws. And if you keep being sweet to your giantess, she'll treat you even better. You'll see. Everything will be fine. Jocelyn nodded in silence. Claire stood up again, looked down at the tiny girl one last time and waved goodbye. Then she walked off and vanished back into the darkness. Jocelyn crept back into Piper's room. Escape was no longer on her mind. Claire had truly shaken her worldview. She needed time to process this human giantess and her words. Back inside Piper's home, Jocelyn looked around nervously. The huge rabbit woman was still snoring. Calm and content, Jocelyn slowly approached her massive paws. She knew Piper was a monster. She had killed so many people, eaten and crushed and squashed them. She was always so merciless and cold-hearted. How could Claire be friends with such a creature? Was that even possible? And even if it was, did Jocelyn want that? But one thing was true. Piper had always been oddly nice to her, had told her she was important. What was she supposed to do with that? Was it a blessing? Or a curse? She hated Piper for everything she had done. But then Claire's words echoed again. Eat or be eaten. And she thought about the freedom fighters she'd once belonged to. Those fools had oppressed and exploited others too, just because they had weapons and power. The world was awful. How could anyone think clearly and stay moral in such a place? Was there even any way to make things better? Was there still a spark of hope for this planet? But she was thinking too far ahead. She needed to take care of herself first, and her future. Jocelyn stepped even closer to Piper's massive paws and stared at them for a long time. When Piper slept, she could actually look kind of peaceful. Jocelyn hesitated. Then she snuggled up against the warm, soft paw, forcing herself to hope that Piper would continue to treat her well. Maybe everything really would be okay. Somehow, someday. The end.